Hey everyone, welcome back to the REI Marketing Secrets podcast. Today on the show, we have Sam Dolciné. And Sam, for our audience out there who's just learning about yourself for the very first time, do you mind just going into a little bit of your background in real estate and how you got started?
Absolutely. So the way I got started in real estate is twofold. So in about 6 years ago, I was at work. I looked at my retirement account, and maybe I was bored. I always tell the story like maybe I was bored, and that's why I was looking at it because who just randomly looks at their retirement account, especially when you're pretty young. And so I did a calculation. I pressed some buttons, and it showed you what they project you would have at retirement. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll have however much money. Then the next question was, well, how do you, how much do you want to live off of each year? I put a very modest number, or at least I thought it was. And the money wasn't going to last long. So I'm like, wait a second, I'm not making much working at this school. I need to figure out a way to make more money outside of my job. And I had heard about real estate. I didn't know people investing. I wasn't aware of this whole world of investors and doing different things. And so I tried to buy a property in LA, and I spoke to the person who I knew, and he's like, based on your financials, there's a small chance maybe you'll qualify for a condo. In my mind, I'm like, that's not exactly what I was thinking because they say you can make money with real estate. So I discovered just in trying to find something that people were investing out of state. And that's what kind of put me on to investing out of state. And, I studied for like a year. And of course, I'm sure we'll get into the details of it, but I studied for a year before I purchased my first property. And then around the same time, I started my own platform to talk about real estate, talk to Black investors, developers, etc. So that was my start in real estate.
And it's funny, that's sort of how I started. I'm not an active investor. I do more passive investing, but I was looking at my retirement account and I've been running my company and I realized like I enjoy running my company, but I don't know if I want to do it for 30 years and that money's going to be locked up in a 401k and an IRA. And then I started to do the math with real estate and I was like, okay, if I invest this much amount per year and I get this percent return, then I would achieve that financial freedom in 7 years where that enough money coming in to cover expenses like the mortgage, utilities, not enough to go on these lavish vacations, but just enough to come in to cover those expenses. And I was like, wow, 7 years sounds a lot better than having to wait 30 years or longer to retire. Because it's like, even if I want to retire at 50 instead of, say, 60, well, it's going to be a little bit more tricky if all my money is locked up. And I don't want to have that on me. And I sort of felt that when I was looking at my account too. And that's why I got into real estate on my end on the passive side. But I'm curious why, one, why the Midwest? And then two, are there particular states that you're looking at within the Midwest? Is it Indiana, Ohio, Missouri? Is there a sort of focal point that you have, or is it more just spread across the different states?
Yeah, great question. So Midwest, first reason is price, to be frank. I had a long list of states, and it's funny. I was helping somebody out, and I was looking at the initial list of states that I had, and primarily it was in the Midwest and parts of the South. However, I got introduced to some folks in Dayton, Ohio, which is the market that I invest in. I have several properties. I got introduced to some folks out in Dayton, Ohio, and my only point of reference to Dayton was that sometimes the NCAA tournament, the men's basketball tournament, sometimes they play, one of the rounds there or whatever. That was my only point of reference. And so I did a lot of research on the particular market. I liked obviously the prices, the cash flow, what was happening in the city and the direction that it was going in. And I'm like, you know what? I think this will be a great opportunity to get started, right? And so that was it for me, and that's the market I focus on. There are a ton of other great markets, and we can certainly talk about those too. But Dayton's where I invest. That's kind of where I'm comfortable, and it's still affordable for what I'm looking for and the pace that I'm looking to grow at, which is a slower pace, is working right now. So I'll probably continue investing there until I get priced out.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Why that going at that particular market. And for me, when I was looking at the Midwest and the southern states to invest in, I know you mentioned you're in LA. I'm in New York. Probably not the easiest for landlords in these particular
Terrible.
states. So that's why I like investing out of state. Where I'm sure you enjoy living in LA. I enjoy living in New York, but I know it can just be a little bit trickier on some of the landlords in these states. But again, not that we don't enjoy living in these states. It's nice that there's a little bit more landlord friendly states that are out there within Dayton, Ohio, and these deals that you're looking at. Just give our audience some examples of what it looks like. Are the properties 150K, 100K, 20, or not 20K, or maybe 20K, 200K? Are you putting 20% down? Are you doing more creative financing? Just curious what it looks like on the deals that you're seeing out there.
Yeah. So my goal and my suggestion is 100K or less because, in many of these markets, if you're buying, let's just say a single family home, if you're buying a single family home for 150, odds are you're probably not going to cash flow or it's going to be very difficult to do so. So my suggestion is 100K or less for a single family home. Multifamily, obviously 2 to 4 units. It just really depends. It's a little bit of a different ball game. Me personally, I do it in the traditional way. I put 20% down. However, to buy my first property, I did do some creative things to come up with the down payment. So the first thing I did was I put my student loans into forbearance, which means that I didn't have to pay them for a year. And I know the last couple of years, like everybody's had forbearance, right?
Mhm.
But that helped me save a lot of money because I was paying a lot of money, like a lot, probably like $500 a month. So that was the first thing I did. The second thing I did was I borrowed money from my 401k and just paid it back, right? So I basically did a calculation. I'm like, you know what? I can afford this payment with my 9 to 5. This will help me speed up the timeline to buy this property. And that's what I used to buy the first property. But yeah, 20% down. I have a loan with like a traditional lender, and then I have another that was processed through a credit union, but is serviced by some other company. But yeah, I typically do 20% down. Obviously, there's a lot of creative ways and seller financing and subject to and all this stuff, but I do it the traditional way.
And if someone's putting, say they find a property for 100K, they're putting 20K down onto it. Let's say they're budgeting capex, vacancy, different, taxes, interest, whatever the expenses may be. What is the type of cash flow they're looking on the property? Is it maybe $100 a month, $200 a month? There's a certain percentage. Maybe it's 10% cash on cash. Just curious what that looks like from your investment experience.
Yeah. So, in my personal opinion, cash flow of $100, $200 is a waste of time. You might
Hmm.
as well put that money in an index fund, in a high yield savings account or something. Like $100 to $200 cash flow, in my opinion, for a single family home is a complete waste of time because things are going to happen. Stuff is going to need to be fixed. Like, no home is in a perfect condition, even if it's turnkey. So, in my opinion, I am looking at 350 or higher. I'm trying to maximize the cash flow to the greatest extent possible because we're in this to make money, right? And one of the things I don't like seeing online is that people are giving folks a green light on stuff that's making like 150, $200. Like that just doesn't make any sense. Like if that is the deal that you see in the market you're looking at, you need to invest somewhere else or you need to look at your numbers or your strategy again because you could easily be in the negative for the whole year because something is going to happen. Like nothing ever goes as planned. You might have vacancies for longer than you expect. Like anything can happen, right? So for me, I suggest like 350 or above. But again, I try to just get as much as possible. And it's going to depend on your market, right? And so, you factor in your vacancy, your repairs, your property management, taxes, all those things. But yeah, $200 doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I agree with you there. For me being a passive investor, like I'm fine if I put 25K into a deal and I get $200 because I don't have to do any of the management aspect of it. But what if I'm going to be going out there and I'm doing all the big end work, finding the deal, putting the money to the deal, having that property management team in place? I want to make sure that I'm making more money than I could be making as a passive investor because it doesn't really make sense at that point. Because if I'm making $200, I might as well just go be a passive investor and let the operator deal with all those headaches instead of me having to go out there and do it. Like you mentioned earlier, you're in LA and now you're investing in Dayton, Ohio. Obviously, that's not, you can't just, I mean, you could technically hop in a car and drive there, but it's probably going to take you a couple of days. How do you find these properties? Do you have a team that's out there? And then, two, you mentioned the property management aspect of it as well. Is that a big aspect of how you're able to invest in these properties out of state and making sure that everything's buttoned up if a tenant falls behind on rent and you may have to evict them just to standard, let's say, like in my house today, we had water leaking from under the sink, and we have to call you, not a property management guy, but have to call the plumber to come in and fix it. How do you really manage it from being so far away from them?
Excellent question. So the first thing I would say is yes, I do have a team. So I have a realtor who I work with when I'm actively buying. I have a like handy person. So for example, I have a vacancy right now. Someone is moving in next Wednesday. So, today she's gonna get rid of some poison ivy, do a little bit of landscaping. And I personally self-manage. And so I have someone who is also an investor out there who she does like the open houses for me. She is going to do the walkthrough with the tenants. And what she'll do is she'll get their money orders or cashier's checks for the first payment, and she'll just overnight it to me, right? And that's how I'll be able to get those funds for the initial payment, right? So I have help, I have support. I haven't been out there in almost 4 years, and I'm cool with that, right? Hopefully I'll be able to get out there maybe next year or something, but it's not a priority. And for me, I actually recommend that people get a property manager starting out and just see how it goes. Obviously, you want to vet them, and we can dive into how that works. But recommend for the majority of people to get a property manager. The reason I don't have one is because I had one, it didn't go well. I decided to try for myself. A friend encouraged me to try it, and it's been fine, right? I'm decent. We get the job done. But for the majority of people, I strongly recommend getting a property manager just to save your time, just to take care of things for you. It's just a matter of vetting on the front end. So yes, I do have a team, and it's not a lot of work when the property is occupied. It is a lot of work when the property is vacant. So the last
Mm.
couple of months has just been like, fixing stuff and open houses. And I'm pretty relieved and excited that someone's about to move in because, after the next like 5 days, I got to get certain things in order to get everything ready. But then I'm out of it. Like they take care of everything, utilities, so on and so forth. So, um, property manager, I recommend it for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a key aspect of the team. And I know you mentioned your experience, not going too well with the property manager, and I think there's good property managers. I know I own a house now, but when I was in an apartment complex, two different ones. One property management team was very good. One was very not so good at the end of the day, and so you can tell that there's some people that are very good, some people that aren't good. Obviously wasn't vetting them; they just came with the apartment complex that I was in. But on your end, curious to see how your experience was, and then two, if someone was like, hey, maybe I just don't want to self-manage them, I'd rather hire that property manager, what would you recommend on how they can vet them to ensure, obviously no one's foolproof and something may happen, but at the end of the day, give them the best chance of hiring that property manager that's going to allow them to succeed?
Yes. So for my experience, there were a few things. So the first thing was every month the property manager sent me just a statement. Sometimes they might have repairs below the threshold where they have to get my approval, and just a monthly statement of what's going on. Eventually, that monthly statement started including the tenant maintenance request. And I noticed that on one of those statements, there was a tenant maintenance request saying that the fence collapsed. The fence collapsed, and they told me nothing about it. And so I reached
Mm.
out and I'm like, hey, this is on the statement. Y'all haven't told me anything about it. I had the person who helps me out there go by and take a picture. It looked terrible. And so I said, okay, they took forever to get it fixed. And it was a wooden fence. They took forever to get that portion of it fixed. And that was the first red flag.
Mm.
The second red flag is when I went out there to visit for the first time, and I was trying to get access to the property just to put my own eyes on it, see it for myself, because I didn't physically go inside of it before I purchased the property. And the person at the management company was acting like I was a nuisance, like I was bothering him. So I ended up
Mm.
just pulling up to the house and checking in, right? And after that, I'm like, you know what? What I realized is that at that time, I have one door with these people. This might be a little bit cynical, but are they going to prioritize me at the time who has one unit with them? Or are they going to prioritize the person who has 20 units with them? Because property managers go off of volume. Their fees are not very high, but they go off of volume. They need a lot of doors underneath their management to make money. So I'm like, you know what? My friend's been pushing me to try. Let me just try and see how it goes. So it just left a bad taste in my mouth. And that doesn't mean that there are not good property managers out there. I know people in the market, who are having good experiences with their property managers. I'm just like, you know what? I'll take on the headache. I'll figure it out and I'll do this. So that was my experience. And then your second question, was it about what people should be looking for in property managers?
Yes, correct.
So here's a few things I would do. So in order to find one, you can do a few things. You can go to the local investor Facebook groups in that particular market. You can do a Google search or a Yelp search. I strongly recommend reading those Google reviews, right? And seeing what people are saying, seeing what tenants are saying, seeing what owners are saying, and trying to get as much information as you can about that particular property manager. I mentioned those investor Facebook groups. You can do a search for a property manager that you saw, or even search the word property manager and see what people recommend. So you want to do your groundwork on that front before you even reach out to them. Many property management companies have all their fees and everything listed out on their website. It's kind of laughable how many don't have that. But those who do have that, you see what percentage they charge. You see what they charge for everything, what they charge to place a tenant, what they charge if they charge anything to do your 1099 and do your statements and do inspections and all those things. So you want to take into account all of the fees that they have. Another thing is, one of the questions you want to ask, among others, is will they allow your lawyer to review their lease? If they
Hmm.
don't, run away. Because I'm going to tell you something. When I self managed, I made a rookie mistake. I literally used the lease that the property manager had used and just modified it, right? When I bought it to a lawyer for a tenant at a new property a couple of years later, he basically redlined the whole thing and said, look, we're going to start from scratch. This is a horrible lease. As a landlord, you need to protect yourself. And the property manager needs to allow you to have a third party, have your lawyer review the lease to make sure your interests are protected, right? And so those are some tips I would provide to look for a correct property manager. And here's the thing, it may not always work out. And if it doesn't, there's more out there, right? You should have a list and talk to these people, see what you think of them, see, are they responsive? I was helping somebody out who's looking to, a student of mine who's looking to purchase in the Dayton market. And I was calling property managers on her behalf just to save her some time. You won't believe the number of people who don't pick up the phone, the number of people who have a system where you have to leave a message. They're adding more friction. If you're in a client facing business where you need doors, someone should always be able to pick up the phone during business hours, right? So if it's hard to get in touch with them, take them off the list, right? They need to be responsive. So those are some tips that I would provide as far as looking for property managers. Referrals are cool, recommendations if you have people who know certain property managers, but you want to do your own due diligence as well.
Yeah, I think all of that is spot on, especially for everyone listening in our audience. And I can't harp on enough the communication aspect of it. That's been a big thing for me being a passive investor. And not that I'm betting a property management company, but I'll be talking to potential operators and I'll ask them a question and they'll take like a week to get back to me. I'm like, I haven't even invested any money with you yet, and you can't respond to me or asking questions about their deal. And similar to your experience with your property management company, usually the first person I'm talking to is going to be an investor relations person. And sometimes I just come off and I'm like, no matter how smart the owner is, when you get those people that are second down the line or just employees of the company, they come off as rude. Maybe they don't show up on time. Like, let's say I have a call booked at 11 a.m. and they call me at 11:08 a.m. means they don't respect my time and different things like that. So I can't agree with you more on that communication aspect of it. Whether you're vetting property managers, where there's probably so many, especially in Dayton, I would imagine that's a decent size market. And then similar to if you're vetting a sponsor, there's so many different ones out there, and there's definitely good quality ones. Sometimes it just might take a little while for you to go out there and sift and find them. But you've been talking about some of the things that have gone wrong with the particular property management company. And I think the worry that sometimes people have when they think of investing out of state, and I think it more so comes from these turnkey investment companies where it's almost like slapping lipstick on a pig per se. They make it look nice in the photo that they send the investor, but obviously it's different if you're going out there and you're finding a property on your own. But I'm curious if there's been anything that you've encountered when it comes to more so experiences with your tenants and sort of the advice or either advice or mistakes you see people make when they're investing out of state, just to ensure like they're not saying, hey, I see this property for 60K. I can get $400 a month in cash flow. That sounds phenomenal. And then you buy it, and it's, say it's a very terrible property, or it's a terrible location, and you're actually not getting that $400 a month. It's becoming more of a headache because I'm assuming, coming from LA, me coming from New York, 100K property. I mean, that's so cheap. We're not finding anything like that. I don't even think you could. Yeah, I don't think you could find anything. I don't know if I could find land for 100K near where I am. So curious the mistakes you see people make when they're investing out of state, so that they can sort of avoid some of those horror stories that you may hear online.
Absolutely. So there's just one thing I want to mention, and I'll get into your question. We were talking about just responsiveness, and I want to extend that to everybody you work with. So if it's an electrician, if it's a
Mm,
contractor, if it's a handy person, handyman or woman, if it's a plumber, whoever it is, like, you should not be the one chasing people down. If people want business and they want to work with you, they will respond. And if they can't respond, they'll be proactive enough to say, "Hey, I'm sorry, something came up," whatever the case is, right? The only person who should be delaying potentially is you, right? But if you're trying to get a service from somebody and they're not responding, let them go. Like, I had a fence that I had to rebuild at that property I was telling you about, where I had the issue years ago. And there were certain contractors, they just didn't respond. And it's like, if you're going to be quick, you're going to respond, I'm willing to pay more because I don't have time to waste,
mhm,
right? And it's like, if I ask for a bid or a quote and I ask for it to be itemized between labor and material so I can make sure you're not trying to scam me, I should be able to get that without a fight. So avoid anybody who's trying to make things a fight, who's not trying to be easy to work with, and who's not responding. They don't need your money. They don't need the business if they're going to take forever to respond to you. And if they are going to be a little bit delayed, they should excuse themselves, like, regardless of who they are, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. Don't let people play with your time. And to answer your next question, a few mistakes people make. The first is, you kind of alluded to it, is people see the price and they assume it's a good deal. So somebody might be looking in Detroit, which is a market that I like. However, you have to know the spots. You have to know where are the good pockets to invest in. Somebody might see a property for 70K and be ready to pull the trigger. Did you look at the neighborhood? Do you know what's going on in that neighborhood? Is it one of the areas, wherever it is, not just the Detroit thing, whatever market, where things are going in the right direction? Like, do you know anything about the specific zip code where you're investing in? Do you know what the rents are? Are you looking for a turnkey property? Are you looking for a property you're going to renovate? If so, how are you going to figure out how much it needs to renovate? How are you going to manage it from out of state? Have you thought about all these things, right? So many times people just see the price and they're ready to go, but there's a lot more analysis that goes into it than that, right? You have
mhm,
to do your research, you have to do your due diligence on the particular market and the neighborhoods within that market. All this information is readily available because cities love to publicize things if there's anything going on, right? And so that's one of the mistakes people make. The second is putting too much trust in other people, right?
mm,
So anytime I have somebody doing something, you need to send me a picture. And I might even have somebody checking behind your work to see what's going on, right? And I'm serious about that because it's my investment, right? So I need to make sure things are going right. So you always want evidence, video, pictures. And if there's a second person you can send a check behind the work, then you do it, right? That's how I caught a cleaner who didn't even sweep the steps, right? They didn't do anything. And, we're going through a situation right now to rectify that. But the point is, you have to protect yourself. Nobody's going to look out for you more than you. Your property manager's not going to look out for you more than you. Your agent, your lender, they have good intentions, hopefully, most of the time, if you vet them properly. But at the end of the day, they're trying to get a check. They're trying to feed their families, which is fine. But you have to understand that everything's on the line for you. If it doesn't work out, it's on you. So that's another mistake people make. You just let go and put too much trust in people and you don't verify. You need to trust and verify. And a lot of people take the hands off approach where they don't know anything that's going on. And it's cool to be hands off, but you need to check in enough and make sure there's a second set of eyes on things so that you know exactly what's going on. So that'll be my recommendation, and a couple mistakes people make because people think real estate is passive. It's not. Even if you have a property manager, you need to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do, right? You can't just fully trust them. You have to question things, right? You have to look out for yourself. because otherwise people are just going to get over on you. And that's just, unfortunately, that's the way business works, is people trying to take advantage of other people sometimes. And you gotta protect yourself.
Yeah, I can't agree more with that. Always doing that double check, seeing it for yourself. Like I know even in my business where we're booking people on podcasts and I have a team members in place and I have them email me a weekly report and a monthly report. And I've honestly had people where let's say we have a client, we're booking them on 2 podcasts a month. They say, yep, got them booked on 2 podcasts. And it goes on for 3 months. And then I go in the background and check and they've got them booked on 1 podcast. And the client's like, hey, I paid for 3 months of service. I've got booked on one show out of 6. Well, you were telling me on the back end you were getting the client booked on the 2 shows. So it's like you have to build that trust. I think that comes over time, especially in the beginning. And I know for me that was a big learning curve in my business. Just because someone told me they did something doesn't mean I should take them 100% at their word. Yes, if they've been with me for 2 years, I'm going to take them at their word. But if they're still within 6 months of me hiring them, I just want to make sure that we're building that level of trust and rapport with them because it's your real estate investments where you want to make sure everything is going smoothly. And similar with my business, I don't want to lose clients because people aren't telling me the truth. I'm sure you don't want to have vacancies because the tenant moves out because they don't like the property because they've had a fence down for a longer than extended period of time just because you didn't know. So I agree with you there, just doing that double spot checking. And I mean, you could call it micromanaging to a certain degree, but it's like at the end of the day, it's our livelihood. We want to make sure that it's going good and making sure everything is going smoothly. But Sam, let's say someone was out there and they were looking to start turnkey investing, or not turnkey investing out of state. I know I talked about that before, but investing out of state, what's the best piece of advice that you'd give them?
Yes. So my my first recommendation, if somebody wants to invest out of state, invest in a turnkey property, but not with a turnkey company. Do not invest with a turnkey company because there is very little. There's no negotiation. It's not in your favor. It's bending towards their favor and their will because they're trying to flip the property to you and fix as little as possible. And I was a rookie, right? I did a ton of due diligence, but I was left with some things that came up later on down the road. And I noticed that in the inspections, they did come up. So I had to replace the HVAC system, right? I had to replace the fence several years later. And these are things that were highlighted, but as a rookie, I didn't know what to advocate for or how to, like, I asked them to fix a lot, but there's certain things I kind of didn't ask about. But it's like, if you don't mention it, they're not going to mention it, right? They're trying to get this thing in your hands for as little as possible. So if you do get a turnkey property, which is what I actually recommend, I don't recommend anybody take on any extensive rehab. You might want to do something where maybe it needs new floors, cabinets, paint, just small stuff that just takes a couple days to get done. That's okay. But I wouldn't be tearing walls down and basically flipping a house and all that stuff from distance, because if something goes wrong, and something will go wrong, it'll ruin your confidence and you might never want to invest again. So I recommend doing the less risky route and then slowly but surely taking on more risk with each deal as you build your confidence, as you build your team and things of that nature. So my suggestion is to get something that either needs no work or that needs a little bit of work, and just to go through a realtor. Go through a realtor. Don't go through these turnkey companies. It's just not going to work in your favor. And I'm saying that from experience, right? And so, that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is, when you select the market that you want to invest in, there's a few things you need to look at. What are the major employers? How long have they been there? Are there any new employers coming? Right? Is the city investing in itself? In particular, are they investing in infrastructure? Are they investing money into like things like parks, the roads and bike paths and all those things? We know what bike paths mean, right? That's a sign of what's coming, right? Are they doing things in different areas of town? So some websites, some cities have a downtown website about what they're doing, what the downtown plan is, right? You want to look at the city plans. All this stuff is publicly available because they want money coming back into the city. So they're going to advertise these things, whether it's minutes from like a city council meeting or whatever the case is, statements from the mayor, or articles with news outlets that are local. That's something else you want to look into. You also want to look into how much things are renting for. Let's say you're looking for whatever you're looking for, a 1, 2, 3, 4 unit property. You want to see what those prices are. You want to see what those rents are. And you also want to see how much money you have and what lines up, right? what lines up? What can you have enough for right now, or what can you work towards having for the future as your down payment? All those things. That's something else I recommend keeping in mind, and also networking with people in that particular market. The person who helps me out, I met her online, right? And so you want to get into these Facebook groups, you want to talk to people, you want to schedule little chats. And if you can, and you have the capacity to do so, if there's like maybe one or two markets you settled on, go out and visit, get a feel for it, see it for yourself. That's what I did before I started investing. It's not mandatory, but I think it can help just to put eyes on what it is you're reading about. And a few markets you may want to consider: Dayton, Ohio. I love Dayton, Ohio. Cleveland, you may want to consider. Columbus, it's getting a little pricey, but Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, St. Louis, Kansas City, Missouri. Alabama has some good markets in it too. So Mobile, Montgomery, Northwest Arkansas has some pockets. It's getting kind of pricey now too. But those are some things I would keep in mind as far as investing out of state.
Yeah, that's all excellent advice, and I think our audience will really find that beneficial. But Sam, last question of the day is: if our audience wants to learn more about you or connect with you, where should they go to?
Yes. So you can go to Black Real Estate Dialogue on any social media platform. I'm probably most active on Instagram and YouTube. So you can check out all the content there. If you want to listen to the show on the audio side, you can go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Wherever you want to check me out, Black Real Estate Dialogue, you can feel free to reach out to me, email me, DM me, and I'll get back to you, and hopefully I can help you out.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include that in the show notes of today's episode. And Sam, thanks so much for coming on to the show today.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It was a good experience.